We're live.
All right. सबसे पहले तो सलाम सब साथियों को. Today's session in the SRG series on Marxist Capital with Comrade Shahram Azhar. First of all, we'd like to welcome everyone who's joined us on stream today, and a special thank you to Comrade Shahram for doing these sessions with us. First, I'm just going to start off with an introduction of our speaker. So, Comrade Shahram is a professor at Bucknell University. He also works at Democracy at Work, and he also contributes to Rethinking Marxism, which is a huge Marxist academic journal. And he's also known for his revolutionary music that he's done, and he's also done left organizing. So thank you so much, Comrade Sharam, for doing this with us. Our first session was on Marx's Capital in his life. So it was an introduction to the process of how Marx wrote Capital, how his own ideas and thinking developed in those years. And Comrade Sharam gave a very thorough sort of lecture on that. And due to the ongoing internet situation in Pakistan, for anyone who missed it, it has been uploaded to YouTube. So if you still haven't watched it, feel free to revisit it once again after this lecture. And today's session is on what is and what is not capitalism, how we as Marxists define capitalism and its features. So Comrade Sharam is going to delve in depth into that today. And so please feel free to leave your questions on my co-moderator is going to pin them here, and we will ask them of Comrade Sharam after the lead-off lecture is over. And please make sure that your questions are relevant to the topic at hand, and we will surely ask them. Secondly, we've been changing the format of SRG recently. We started doing this live stream, so let us know. Give us feedback if you like this format better. If you sign up in our membership, you get some extra features like we compile all the recommended readings for you, and you have access to those and other updates of all activities that we're doing. So, without any further ado, I'm just going to give it over to Comrade Sharam to begin the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatma, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Salam, namaste, adab, sat sri akal. Um, Wherever my voice is currently being heard and televised, thank you very much for joining us. And I'd also like to thank the Socialist Reading Group, SRG, and its organizers for organizing this event, for initiating these conversations, and giving me a chance to present my ideas about capitalism and share my thoughts about Marx's Capital with you guys. I wanted to talk very briefly about the main subject for today's session. Can you please share my slides? Thank you. The central theme, or the central provocative question that I'm going to be addressing in today's seminar, as Fatima rightly pointed out, is to define this particular economic system that people have chosen to call capitalism. Now, the word capitalism, as you can see, has latent within it the word capital. And Marx, fortunately, wrote, as we discussed last week, a book about precisely that subject. So to recap very, very briefly, in the last seminar last week, last Sunday, we examined and looked at some really interesting aspects of Marx's life, how this young person was born in Prussia in 1818, matured as a young person in capitalism, became embroiled in a range of political movements and activities in the 1840s, leading to his exile in 1848, soon after the defeat of the European springtime of the masses. After 1848, as we know, as we discussed last week, Marx began to devote his attention increasingly to a study of what he called an examination of the real world as it is, or political economy. For those of you who don't know, at that point in time, what we today call economics and political science were basically considered the same field. And it kind of makes sense for anyone who observes economics and politics that it makes much more sense to examine these two terrains, these two seemingly opposed disciplines together. So what is today called economics was at that point in time called political economy. Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Malthus, and all the rest of it described themselves as political economists. This is exactly why the title or the subtitle of Marx's book, Capital, is a critique of political economy. So what's he trying to do? He's going to try to achieve the following aim. He's going to try to demonstrate, you ready, that Adam Smith and David Ricardo, two of the greatest thinkers of bourgeois political economy, as Marx calls it. By the way, Marx is extremely respectful of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and all of his predecessors. And he's going to criticize them for being unable to develop, you ready? While Adam Smith and David Ricardo had developed a critique of feudalism, while they were extremely critical of the landlord class as a parasitic class, Marx extends his criticism of Adam Smith and David Ricardo by pointing out that just as the landlord represents a parasitic class in society, a class that lives off the labor of others, Marx tells Smith and Ricardo that the same applies to the capitalist class. Okay, so Marx's life, in particular the transformation that took place after the defeat of the 1848 revolutions, Marx devotes his life to thinking more carefully about capital, number one. The second thing that I tried to discuss is that Marx, because of what I just said, was trying to understand how capitalism works rather than at that point in time thinking about what we're going to do about it. What Marx was trying to think about then was not socialism, as most people wrongly assume, but rather how capitalism works. And let me remind you, what he's trying to arrive at is an understanding of how value is produced in an economy. How value is produced, how it circulates via the market mechanism through the veins of the world capitalist system, and how it is then distributed via markets and non-market mechanisms, via finance, banking, and the stock market, and through a range of mechanisms that Marx is going to call the circulation and distribution of capital, such that we witness the macro as well as the micro outcomes that we observe in the real world outside us. That's his agenda. Okay, so what is this thing called capital? Capital is a book consisting of 3 theoretical volumes and 3 historical volumes. In other words, it's a 6-volume set of books in which the first 3 volumes, 1, 2, and 3, are devoted to an analysis of theory, while 4, 5, and 6 examine the history of the concept, i.e. surplus value, developed in volumes 1, 2, and 3. In other words, in volumes 4, 5, and 6, which are called the theories of surplus value, Marx tries to understand, and he's one of the few thinkers who've done this particular exercise in economics. Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, is the only other person to have done this kind of work. Marx carefully examines each and every major thinker in political economy prior to him and examines the reasons why each one of those economists, while they discovered surplus value, they never turned it into a general critique of the world capitalist system as a whole. And finally, the method. I spent some time in the last lecture. If you haven't seen it already, please go back whenever you get the time and look at these 2 videos. The first deals with the issue of how to read capital. How to read capital. That is to say, when we try to study any new discipline, any new idea, any new field, Part of the story is always trying to learn the language deployed by the analyst to make sense of his or her terms, right? Okay. For example, when you study advanced physics, a prior prerequisite of that is that you spend some time, you take a course in calculus. That is to say, in order to make sense of whatever you're going to learn in the physics department, you have to know something as a prerequisite about, let's do it, the method that physicists use, one of the methods that they're going to use to develop or make sense of their theory. Marx chooses the Hegelian method of abstraction. And as I pointed out last week, what that means is something very simple. I invited you guys to think about this, or at least use a metaphor to make sense of it in the following sense. Let's think of abstraction as an instrument in the toolkit of the dialectician, which serves, you remember what I said, like a hypothetical vacuum cleaner that sucks out of reality the differences between two things. The word dialectic is derived from the words dia, meaning to split into two, and lectic, logos, reasoning. So let's do it. The dialectic means to reason via splitting the logic into two. Okay. Now, what happens is, Hegel points out in the Science of Logic, that in doing so, in drawing the similarities and differences between things, we have to focus on their quantitative and qualitative similarities and differences. Let me do that again. Marx's method of analysis in Capital is called abstraction. He doesn't hide this, as I pointed out last week. He clearly points out that I am, his words, pupil of the master Hegel, and I've used that method of abstraction to construct my categories. And I'm going to say more about that in a moment. These are the three theoretical volumes. The first volume, which is going to be the subject matter for today's seminar, is called Volume 1, A Critical Analysis of Capitalist Production. What does that mean? Marx is going to demonstrate, you ready, how surplus value is produced in capitalism. And to do that, as you can see, he's going to have to zoom into the hidden abode of production. What does that mean? That means that he's going to ask you guys and myself to go inside the firm, inside the farm, inside the office, inside the enterprise. What does that mean? That is to say, you ready? We're not going to search for surplus value in the market, in the domain of the observed. To discover the secret of surplus value, we're going to have to go into the hidden abode of production, as opposed to the observed world of markets. Volume 1. Now, to do that, let's do it. He's going to have to, at this stage of the analysis, because I want to talk about production, I'm going to have to, let's do it, abstract from certain features that are going to mystify my analysis. So, like a good dialectician in Volume 1, and he's going to say this, as I'm going to point out next week when we discuss Volumes 2 and parts of Volume 3, he's going to relax this assumption. So Volume 2 is going to be about the following. Volume 1, how surplus value is produced in capitalism. How do Nike, H&M, Walmart, JCPenney, Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia, all the rest of it, produce or design their supply chains so that this shoe is produced, manufactured, assembled in Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh, India, Mexico, Brazil. The finance comes from Paris, Netherlands, the United States. You get the picture. And the commodity is sold in Sweden, Norway, and all the rest of it. Let's do this, guys. Follow the story of this shirt, the shirt that you're wearing right now, the shoes that you wore. Follow their story. Where did the money come to finance this product? Step one. Where did the money come to produce this product? And finally, where was this product sold? Let's do this again. I'm going to make sure that you understand. When you go to your local bank in Thailand and deposit 1,000 or 100, depending on how much you have, dollars in your bank account in Bangkok, 2 hours later, those $1,000 that you deposited are flowing in the veins of the capitalist system and are somewhere in Dhaka, where that money is being used to purchase means of production from Sri Lanka and France, hire the labor of women in Dhaka to stitch the shirts that are going to be sold in Sweden. Notice what I've done. The finance came from location 1. The manufacturing took place in location 2, and the selling took place in location 3. The first two processes, finance and the selling of the product, is going to be called, as you will see next week, the circulation of capital, volume 2. And then in our final session, in our fourth session, we're going to devote our attention to volume 3, which deals with the process of capitalist production as a whole. These are then followed by something that unfortunately I will not be able to cover, not because they're any less important than the 3 theoretical volumes, but purely because of paucity of time and scarcity of time. However, I want you guys to know that these are extremely important if you truly want to understand the arguments and the polemics that go into the writing of Capital. These are known as the theories of surplus value. And I'm just going to read out one really fascinating comment in volume 5 of Capital, or the first volume of the second volume of the theories of surplus value. He says, all economists share the error of examining surplus value not as such in its pure form, but in the particular forms of profit and rent. What is he trying to say? For those of you who don't know, and this is slightly critical here, just a brief historical sketch of the history of economic thought. Prior to Marx, two economists, two bourgeois economists, to use Marx's word, had a profound impact on the way we think about economics, i.e., the science of material wealth. Just a brief historical sketch. What we call the labor theory of value, what Marx is going to use in his analysis, as you will see, was not, and I want to emphasize this, was not developed by Karl Marx. So for those of you who thought, rightly or wrongly, that Marx is the creator of, the discoverer, whatever word you prefer, Marx came up with the labor theory of value. If you held that view, my friends, that view is wrong. Because here's the story. About 300 years ago, one of the first people to start thinking about this idea, where does value come from? How is value produced? And what is the source of value? This question first began to bother economists in France. And lo and behold, you ready? Because at that point in time, as I discussed last week, we used to live, or Europe was under feudal conditions of production. As you can expect, the dominant class in society in feudalism is the class of land owners. So the first theory of value, you ready? How thought began to conceptualize the material world, dialectical materialism. How economic thought began to conceptualize the question of value depended critically on who was writing the text. As Marx points out in the German ideology, the ruling ideas are in every epoch the ideas of the ruling class. So at that point in time, you guessed it, the representatives of the landlords came up with a theory of value. What do you think that value said, that theory said? You ready? That theory told us that there is only one source of value, and that is agricultural land. That's right. Physiocracy, as it's called, is a school of thought in economics. On Shararta nahi karo beta. Is a school of thought in economics that argues that the source of value, all value, lies in and has to be sought in land. Soon after, this school of thought, known as physiocracy, was replaced by the school of thought we today call mercantilism. Mercantilism. As you can see, the word mercantilism is derived from the word merchant. So you guessed it. All of those entrepreneurs, it's in quotes, from the East India Company. You've heard that name. You're from South Asia. One of the first multinational corporations in the world was a merchant company. What did it do? It bought silk in India and sold it in England. It bought spices in Bengal and sold them in Manchester. Merchant capitalism. Now you can, let's look at this. What do you think was the source of value according to the mercantile capitalist? That's right. The merchant capitalist thought that the source of value lies in buying and selling things. The act of buying and selling, according to the mercantile capitalist, lies in the act of buying and selling. After all, isn't that what he or she does? Okay. Moreover, since we lived at this point in time in a world in which paper money did not exist, we lived at a time in which gold or silver metals represented the form of money at the time. So people thought, the mercantile economists, or what we're calling merchant capitalism later, what they thought is that the total wealth in the system, the total wealth of the economy, the world economy, is fixed. Why? Well, think about it. Because in their mind, wealth is the same thing as money. Gold and silver is wealth for them. In other words, at this point in time, the economics that held this particular way of thinking argued that wealth is a zero-sum game. One person's gain is another person's loss. That is indeed how it is in the world of the merchant. However, that does not answer the question, where did the wealth come from in the first place? Now, in 1776, a man called Adam Smith, who is known as the father of modern economics, solved this mystery by writing a book called The Wealth of Nations. The Wealth of Nations. And to cut a long story short, he demonstrated that the wealth of a nation has to be produced, and the secret of production lies in labor. So the founder, the person who first made this revolution in economic thought, was Adam Smith, by discovering the labor theory of value. All right, guys, with that brief recap, what are we going to discuss today? In today's seminar, I have 6 major objectives or aims, so that by the end of this seminar, firstly, you should be able to distinguish between Marxist versus non-Marxist theories of capitalism. Just as there are different theories of music, different theories of physics, different theories of medicine, different theories of love, just as different ideas conflict and contend with one another. Similarly, all economists, all thinkers do not agree, just as they do not agree on everything else, on what we mean by capitalism. So, my aim here is to focus on what Marx's Capital tells us about capital, i.e., capitalism. Objective number one. Number two, I'm going to argue, or Marx is going to argue rather, that capitalism is not a system of exchanging things. It's not a way of distributing things. But at this stage of the analysis, we're going to argue that capitalism is a way of organizing production and work. Number two. Number three, we're going to understand how this reading that was assigned for today, chapter 9 and 10 of Marx's Capital, volume 1, develops a new and nuanced theory of class exploitation that goes beyond the world of the Communist Manifesto of 1848. I don't want to lose what we did last week. As you know, for those of you who've read the manifesto, what did Marx say? He had a binary understanding of class. Of course, it was a pamphlet. It was not designed as an advanced theoretical text. Only simpletons read that into it. Marx's Capital in 1867 develops a new theory of class and class analysis, and as a result, class struggle, that which Marxists think is central to the movement of history. Number 4 and 5. I'm going to take you into the hidden abode of production, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And if you're lucky, you get to leave at 5 p.m. As we will see, as we speak, individuals around the world are living in despair and dying from that despair because they do not get that particular facility of leaving at 5 p.m. And finally, we're going to conclude, and I'm going to define this term, or Marx is going to clearly define his object of analysis, capital, not as a thing. So someone asks you after this seminar, what is capital? The answer is, capital is a process. What process? It is the process via which value expands. It is the process via which 100 became 120, 120 became 200, 200 became 250, and 250 became 1,000. You with me? Capital is not money. Capital is not a machine. Capital is not a chair. Capital is not a thing. It can be a thing. It can be embodied in a thing. Capital is a flow process. All right. This is the table of contents for volume 1. So if you open volume 1 and look at its table of contents, you begin to, I'm just looking at the first 14 chapters from now, for now. Of course, the book is much longer. But if you just look at the first 4 sections of this book and think about how it's organized, especially after what I just said and said last week, that this book is not about markets. This book is not about socialism. It discusses markets, but it's not about that. This book is about, or at least that's my reading of the book, it has a very unique politics that's rooted in chapter 9 and 10 and 11. The rate of surplus value and the working day. Then you can legitimately ask me the following question: why does he waste 8 chapters in talking about other things? As you will see shortly, and I will walk you through the logic of Marx's Capital and why he writes the way he does, why he develops or presents his arguments the way he does. But this is not written in stone. If you read Marx's exchanges with Engels, his letters with his best friend, for example, he's continuously anxious about this because he's like, the French reader is going to be impatient, and are they going to read till chapter 9? I mean, some people are going to be bored by the first 2 or 3 philosophical kind of chapters. How do I get them to read that without boring them at first? And by the way, this is a challenge that I face as well. Right now, as I speak, there is no guarantee that many of you are listening to me. There's no guarantee. Nothing is guaranteed at all. So Marx faces that anxiety and chooses to, it's a choice that he makes, describe and define his agenda in the following way. He says that I'm going to first talk about part one, which is commodities and money. Look around you. What you're wearing right now, the device via which you're looking at me right now, this bottle, the house in which you're currently located, the breakfast that you ate, the car that you drove, each and everything is a commodity. So you're surrounded by commodities. So Marx is not starting with something that's abstract. What is a commodity? It's not string theory, where the object is not observable. Commodities are all around you. So chapter one literally is called commodities. And here's what he's going to do. He's going to say that, well, if I look at the chair and the house and the computer and the bag of rice and the potatoes and the toothbrush, they're all commodities. But as you can see, they all look different. Now that's a problem. How does the scientist do this? When the scientist, Carl Linnaeus, looked at the animal kingdom, he faced a similar problem. He was like, well, what do I see? I see a dog, I see a horse, I see a chimpanzee, I see all of these qualitatively different looking animals. Yet, to make sense of this totality, Carl Linnaeus came up with a classification scheme. The word class is derived from the verb with a V. The word classify means to construct a scheme of categories, a taxonomy, so that I can make sense of the population that I'm trying to examine. In Carl Linnaeus's case, that population is the domain of animalia, his words, animal kingdom. But not on, and all animals are the same. He says, you ready? That the horse, the chimpanzee have something in common that makes them different from the lizard. What is that difference? They both have mammary glands. And the common attribute of having mammary glands allows Carl Linnaeus to classify the horse and the dog and the chimpanzee in the same category called mammals. So, in other words, Carl Linnaeus abstracts from the qualitative differences between the horse and the chimpanzee to arrive at a category, a conceptual notion called mammal. Now, if someone asked Carl Linnaeus, sir, can I look at a mammal, please? How would he respond? As you can see, he would respond by pointing out that this is an abstraction. Similarly, Marx is going to do the same thing to the world of commodities. He's going to ask you, as you will see in a moment, the same question. Now, from that analysis of commodities, Marx is going to make the following claim. You ready? These are all distinct, qualitatively distinct commodities. I'm going to define that term very clearly. I promise you, every term used in Marxian economics has a clear definition. Very, very clear. Why? Because Marx kept perfecting his conceptual categories literally till the day he died. Okay, so he's going to start with commodities. Those commodities are going to be, chapter 2, exchanged in the market. And through this exchange in the market, certain norms and ideas and gravitational forces pertaining to the costs of production are going to prevail, such that exchange is going to result in prices of production. Now, when you and I go into the market, we pay a price tag. For example, this little thing has a price tag on it. In other words, what I am looking at over here is not quoted in labor hours. This bottle does not tell me how many labor hours worth of value it has inside it. It has a price tag which says $1. In other words, the value that you and I are familiar with is the one that we observe in the grocery store, which is quoted in the terms of money, pieces of paper. We live in the world of paper money, where one country is going to have pictures of one head of state on a piece of paper that is printed by the central bank of that particular country. And that picture also keeps changing depending on who is in power. I'll leave it at that for the moment, because the only thing that I want to emphasize at this stage of the analysis is that money is, you ready, a universal commodity. So here's what Marx is doing. Chapter 1, begin with commodities, abstract, develop some commonalities within them using the method of abstraction, just as Carl Linnaeus looked at horses and chimpanzees and came up with the notion, Hegel's word, notion of mammal. Marx is going to do the same thing. He's going to say, once I abstract from the chair and the house and their qualitative and quantitative differences, they're all products of human labor in the abstract. And that is precisely why they can be exchanged in the market. For two things to be compared with one another as they are in the market, when I, as the person who makes shoes, goes into the market and you, as the person who makes toothbrush, appear in the market, I am interested in buying your toothbrush, you are interested in wearing my shoes. In order for this, let's use the word chapter 2, exchange to take place, we must, you and I, agree on some convention. In order for the shoes, qualitatively different, to be compared with the toothbrush, qualitatively different, you and I must, in the process of exchange, arrive at some way of comparing and contrasting between these two objects, so that at this stage of the analysis, it matters precious little that the chair is used to sit on while the toothbrush is used to clean your teeth. That matters precious little at this stage of the analysis. Just as for Carl Linnaeus, it matters precious little that the dog barks and the chimpanzee climbs trees. Those, for Carl Linnaeus, are qualitative differences that he's gonna, let's use the word, abstract from, so that he can focus on the common attributes of mammals. Marx is gonna do the same thing. Okay. Now, I want to dive into how he's going to construct his argument. Last week, I pointed out that Marx's dialectical method, Marx's materialist method, is different from Hegel and other thinkers in the precise sense, and he makes kind of a joke about it, and some people have taken that joke too seriously. He points out that I'm going to use Marx's word, invert the dialectic. What that means is that instead of starting with some spectacular, fantastic, idealistic, scholastic version of reality, I'm going to start with the real world as it is. What does that mean? For those of you who've been enrolled in an economics program like myself, You must have encountered this story of Robinson Crusoe. It's one of the favorite stories of economists. And the story goes that imagine that you and I are stuck on an island, and now we have to do this and that. Well, most human beings are not stuck on an island, nor are they living as isolated individuals. Most human beings live in societies and neighborhoods and are born in families. And I don't know about you, that's the way life was, the way I experienced it on a daily basis. If you feel that the metaphor, the analogy of an isolated individual called Robinson Crusoe stuck on Solomon Islands is the right way of thinking about the world for you, congratulations. Please stop listening to whatever I'm going to say after this. But if you think, as Marx did, that the premises from which we begin are not arbitrary ones, not fantasies, not dogmas, but real premises from which abstraction can only be made in the imagination. So before I dive into the complexities of chapter 9 and chapter 10 of Marx's Capital, and the secret of surplus value and use value and exchange value, I'm sure you've struggled with those if you've done the reading. Before I do that, I'm going to follow Marx and look at real premises. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with some recent, and by recent I mean within the last month or two, some recent news items, the real premises, and then I'm going to invite you to think about these via abstraction, to develop concepts that can explain the outcomes I'm about to discuss. For those of you who are weak-hearted or are in the middle of a lunch or dinner or breakfast, you can move away and watch this lecture later, because what I'm about to say is going to sicken your heart and soul. If it doesn't, then my friend, you need to visit a psychiatrist, because you have neither. Tarun Saxena. Tarun Saxena. A young man who could not sleep for 45 days because, I've highlighted it here, he could not meet targets despite trying his best. If you have a pen and paper with you, I want you to write this down. Tarun was found dead this morning by the house help. He had locked his wife and 2 little children in another room. In a 5-page letter addressed to his wife, Tarun wrote, "Let the subaltern speak." Tarun wrote that he was under immense stress because he could not meet targets despite trying his best. Let's do it one more time slowly, just in case you missed it. Write these words down. He could not meet targets despite trying his best. He could not meet targets despite trying his best. But maybe you are under the impression that Tarun Saxena had some psychological issue. He had some pre-existing condition. That is indeed what the bourgeois liberal is going to tell you. So let me tell you something else. Anna Sebastian, an Ernst & Young employee, died recently at the tender age of 26. Her mother, Augustine, said that her daughter had worked tirelessly. Please write down these words. Worked tirelessly to meet the demands of her new job but that another word, workload, new environment, and please write this down, I beg you, long hours took a toll on her health. But maybe this is something peculiar about Tarun Saxena and Anna Sebastian. In the United States, the richest country on planet Earth, people of color are more likely to work long, irregular hours that could lead to severe health issues by the age of 50. And by the way, this is not from some leftist periodical. As you can see, this was a news item on April 17th, 2024 in the Fortune magazine, which, for those of you who did not notice, is not a Marxist Leninist periodical. However, my friends, I will not just be the bearer of bad news. If you own a share or a stock in Apple, if you are a shareholder, or if you're on the board of directors, I have some really good news for you. Capitalism is working. Here is a slide that shows you the performance of Apple. Apple, my friends, was incorporated back in the day, and just look at this performance. This is the beauty of capitalism. Apple has gone from being a tiny little company in a garage to being a $1 trillion company. Isn't that amazing? You should celebrate capitalism. Why are you guys reading the work of this archaic thinker from 1867? Look at this. Isn't this beautiful? Doesn't this make you feel like falling in love with capitalism? This is beautiful. But there's a problem. State capitalism in China is the cause of the profits of Apple. So the last slide is connected with this one. And if you don't trust me, go ahead and read this book, Dying for an iPhone: Apple, Foxconn, and the Lives of China's Workers. When you get the time, Google the term Foxconn suicides, and you'll know everything that I'm talking about. But I don't want to pick on Apple as the only criminal in this story. Amazon is no different. Recently, this news item appeared on September 30th, 2024. Amazon India workers say they're overworked and mistreated during a brutal heat wave. Workers are entitled to 2 30-minute breaks during their 8-hour shift. The rest of the time, Neha says, she's a worker, managers expect them to power through the day, calling it a fast start and a strong finish. Neha wants to only use her first name. I wonder why she's so worried. Oh, someone has to remind Neha that she lives in a democracy. Oh, but she doesn't feel that way. Neha feels that she lives in a dictatorship. She can't say anything. I thought that capitalism guarantees freedom of speech. But look at Neha. She only wants to use her first name, fearing retaliation from her managers. Most other Amazon workers NPR spoke to requested similar anonymity. So it's not that Neha is a coward. She lives under a dictatorship. They told NPR that the busiest periods are while processing orders. Neha says that's when their bosses pressure them not to use toilets or take a water break. Isn't that amazing? But maybe you're under the impression that all the examples so far I gave are from poor countries like China and India. You know that things are a lot better elsewhere, you know. This is from the United States. Amazon drivers, I told you, I'm sorry. If you're eating or if you just had your lunch, please go away from the screen because, my friend, capitalism is sickening. These are narratives of, and you can verify all of this when you get the time. Amazon drivers say they had to do what it says because of the lack of, you know, any empathy, even basic human empathy from this corporate behemoth. But Amazon is doing really well. Amazon is worth $1.95 trillion. That's great news if you own a stock. That's great news if you're profiting from this. But it's terrible news if you're on the other side. So here's my question. Can we explain this outcome, the one on your boards right now, the one on your screens rather right now? Can we explain this outcome? What explains the fact, and this is for the richest country in the world, the same is true for India, the same is true for China, you can verify this. The richest 0.01% have had a bonanza of a time. It's been amazing. It's been one of the best periods in human history. Capitalism has done extremely well for them. I love capitalism if I were a member of the 0.01%. Unfortunately for capitalism, I am not, so I'm going to continue with Marx's critique. So here's my question. I just shared some news items with you, the real premises from which we must abstract. So I'm going to ask you the following question. Do you think, as a thinking person, or some of my audience members are social scientists, do you think that as a thinking person or as a social scientist, you need, you ready, a theory to explain the murder of Tarun Saxena and Anya Sebastian and the workers of Foxconn? Do we need such a theory? And if so, what do we abstract from? Should we look at the markets? Did Arun Saxena complain about, oh my God, I went to the market and I couldn't sell the product? Is that why he committed suicide? What did he say? Read out the words that you have written in front of you. What did Anna Sebastian's mother say? Did she say that while getting the loan from the bank? Hidden abode of production. That's what we need to zoom into. So the answer depends on whose story you want to narrate. Do you want to tell the story of the landlord like the physiocrats? Do you want to tell the story of the merchant like the mercantilists? Do you want to tell the story of the bourgeoisie like Adam Smith or David Ricardo? Or do you want to tell the story of Tarun Saxena and Anna Sebastian like Karl Heinrich Marx? Marx says that Tarun Saxena died because Bajaj Finance is doing extremely well. Anna Sebastian perished because Ernst & Young is doing really well. The workers of Foxconn committed suicide in 2011 and 15 and 17 because Apple is doing extremely well. The dialectic of wealth and misery. Marx is going to say that the accumulation of wealth at one pole is therefore at the same time accumulation of misery, agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, mental degradation at the opposite pole. To remind you, last week we did this already. I had presented this 6-step framework via which I demonstrated in a very simple logical set of points that the people who make the goods and services that everyone else consumes, these people produce more than what they themselves consume, which leads to the conclusion that these people make a surplus. How do we define a surplus? A surplus is defined as the part of the total product that is more, M-O-R-E. That's the word Marx uses in Capital. In German, the word is mehr, M-E-H-R. The English translation literally would be more, but the translator chose the word surplus. You with me? But the word means in German more, more. So the worker has to perform, let's do it, more labor than what he or she consumes or what is necessary for their own subsistence. Okay. Now, let's dive into chapter 9. The first concept I'm going to introduce to you is the concept of necessary and surplus labor. Necessary and surplus labor. It emanates directly from what I just said. Marx is going to say that we're going to divide the working day into two parts. That portion of the working day during which the reproduction in which I make enough to reproduce my own wage, the amount of total product that I myself consume. Marx is going to call that, you ready? Necessary labor. Necessary labor. Why is it necessary? Marx asks. It's necessary in the precise sense that regardless of the form of production, slavery, serfdom, communism, capitalism, regardless of the form, the productive members of the society are always going to have to perform necessary labor to feed themselves. So the first part of the total work performed by Tarun Saxena and Anna Sebastian, the part in which they produce the wage that they received from their employer, Marx is going to call that necessary labor. Please write that down. During the second period of the labor process, that in which his labor is no longer necessary labor, Tarun Saxena, it is true, labors, expends labor power, but his labor being no longer necessary, he creates no value for himself. He creates surplus value, which for Bajaj Finance, Ernst & Young, Foxconn China, Apple, Amazon, which he creates surplus value, which for the capitalist has all the charms of a creation out of nothing. This portion of the working day I name surplus labor time. And to the labor expended during that time, I give the name of surplus labor. Let me simplify this with an example. I'm going to give you the example of pizza production. It's almost lunchtime here and I'm extremely hungry. So I thought that at the very least, even if I can't feed myself in the real, I can at the very least imagine and feel good about it. Let's say that there's this character, our friend Smith, and he uses his nerves, his knowledge of how to do this, the recipe, the video he saw on YouTube, etc., the culinary school he went to. He uses his nerves and his muscles. This is the process I'm going to define as laboring. Why is this important? Guys, this is extremely important. Every word I use has a clear definition. For example, the act of buying stocks online is not labor. The act of buying and selling things is not labor. You get me? The act of using nerves and muscles to convert tomatoes, mozzarella pans into a pizza is labor. The act of converting inputs into 10 pizzas. That's what Smith does. You with me? Smith bakes 10 pizzas. Each of these pizzas is divided into 2 slices each, so that there are 10 multiplied by 2. This is extremely complex mathematics. 20 slices. 10 people, including Smith, will consume these 20 slices. You with me, guys? So this is the hypothetical I'm setting up. Given this example, I'm going to use some terminologies, and these are exactly the terms Marx is going to use in Capital. In this case, Smith is the direct producer, concept 2. Direct producer. What do we mean? The person or the set of persons, plural, that are using their nerves and muscles to convert the input into a product that will be consumed, we're going to use the word direct producer or direct producers. If it's a team product for those individuals. You with me? And we're going to reserve a different word to talk about the other 9 people who consumed the pizza without using their nerves and muscles to convert the mozzarella and cheese and pans into a pizza. You with me? So, in other words, we have one producer, direct producer, and 10 consumers, including the person, Smith, who baked them. Now I'm going to use some numbers. It takes 2 hours to bake one pizza, so it takes 20 hours to prepare 10. You with me? It takes 2 hours to bake one, so it takes 10 multiplied by 2 equals 20 hours of Smith's labor time to produce 20 slices of pizza. Smith consumes 2 of those slices, and look at the example. It took 2 hours of labor, 1 hour each, to produce one slice. Smith consumes 2 hours worth of labor, which is equal to 2 slices. You with me? For those of you who are interested in this, although it's not directly the topic of our discussion, why did Adam Smith come up with labor as the source of value? Why? Why did he come up with this idea? Because here's the idea. His idea was that, well, I could have spent 2 hours baking that pizza so that I could consume it myself. But I could also, you ready, save myself those 2 hours of labor and go to the market and purchase this item from Smith, who has done the same thing. You with me? This is how Adam Smith, through this process of analyzing real businesses as they are, this is how he and David Ricardo after him came to this conclusion that the source of value must be sought in the amount of labor required to make something. Is this clear? Okay. Smith uses his nerves and muscles to bake 10 pizzas. What do we know? We know now that Smith's 20 hours of labor can be divided into 2 parts. The first part is going to be called necessary labor by Marx. And this is equal to 2 hours. This is the amount of labor that Smith performed and himself consumed. But Smith, we know from the example, labored in total for 20 hours. So 20 minus 2, again, this is very advanced mathematics, is 18 hours of surplus labor. Okay. So Smith's labor, although Smith may not realize this himself, can be analytically divided into 2 parts, necessary labor and surplus labor. Just as the chimpanzee and the horse and the dog do not know that they are part of the same species called a mammal, similarly, it matters precious little at the analytical stage of doing this, that whether Smith is conceptually aware of this or not is not relevant at this stage. We are using conceptual categories of necessary labor and surplus labor. You with me? Okay. Now, you guys are smart people. I want to invite you to think about this problem logically. What can you deduce from this information? You can deduce that there is a necessary and surplus product, 2 pizzas, necessary product, 18 pizzas, 2 slices, let me do that again, 2 slices, necessary product, 18 slices, surplus product. The same can be mapped onto the number of hours required to do this. 2 hours of necessary labor, 18 hours of surplus labor. So let's do this. Necessary product is to necessary labor what surplus product is to surplus labor. I hope you got that. But here's the challenge. Go back to this information that I gave you. Smith used his nerves and muscles. Very good, very good. He converted inputs into an output. Awesome. He made 20 slices. We deduced from this and this alone that Smith performed two kinds of labor, necessary labor and surplus labor. He produced a necessary product and a surplus product. That's what you can deduce from this information. But what can you not deduce? What can you not deduce from this information? To remind you, we know that Smith performed surplus labor. How do I know this? I was looking at it. I promise you, he baked 20 slices and I was looking at him the whole time. He only ate 2 of them. Smith performed surplus labor. I already know that. But I do not know, you ready, under what conditions? Why did he do this? To answer that question, Marx is going to provide you with a way of thinking about it. You ready, guys? Please pay attention. Marx is going to say, he's going to ask you to do the following exercise. And while I'm going to do this for Smith, I want you to do this for every single individual that you meet in your life and ask them, why did you make more than what you received? Why did you make a surplus? And depending on how they answer that question, you're going to deduce something about the relations of production. So let's do this. Karl Marx meets Smith, our friend, and asks him, Mr. Smith, why did you make 18 more pizza slices than what you consumed? Why did you do this? I saw you, my friend. You made 20. I promise I was looking I was paying attention. I saw this with my own eyes. You made 20. And then I saw you consuming 2 of them. Why did you do this? Why the hell did you make a surplus? And depending on how Smith answers this question, Marx is going to make a logical deduction. So let's do this. One of the answers could be, when asked, why did you make 18 instead of 2? One of the answers could be, Smith says, he takes me to the side and says, you see that guy over there? I'm like, yes, he owns my body and mind. I'm like, shit, seriously, man? Yes, you're a slave. Option 1. Option 2 is, he says that, I'm not his property. My mind and body is not his or her property, but my mobility is restricted. I can't leave this place. I'm tied to the land. Marx is going to deduce that Smith is a serf. Another answer could be, he says, that one of them is neither my owner, my slave master, nor is he my lord, but he pays me a wage worth 2 pizza slices and sells the remaining 18 on the market, and he makes decisions about that. I will deduce he is a capitalist wage laborer. But Smith, now, since he's met Karl Marx, he's also read volume 1 of Capital, and he has come to the conclusion that we can produce in a different way. So he says that, why I made these pizzas for them? You know why I made 18 more than what I consumed? You ready? Because they are my community. The word communist is derived from the word community. Community. Will a surplus be produced in communism? Hell yes. For 192,000 years, out of the 200,000 years of human existence on this planet, we have lived as method number 4. What we call primitive communism. The primitive is just a way of historicizing it. The primary thing to consider is that for 192,000 out of the 200,000 years of human economic history, we made a surplus. A surplus was made, it was distributed. I'm here, Charlie, and that represents the fact that my ancestors were doing absolutely fine without slavery, without serfdom, and without wage labor. I hope that clarifies to you the following: that just through the act of observing necessary and surplus labor, we cannot deduce something about, you ready? Yes, let's use the word, the class process. At this stage of the analysis, then, we're operating in the generality called necessary and surplus labor. So you guessed it already. The manner in which the surplus is pumped out of Smith, whether because Smith is the ownership of the master, or because his mobility is restricted, or because he gets a wage, or because they are my community. The manner in which the surplus is in each case pumped out of the direct producer, in our case Smith, is going to shape our economic system. Here's what Marx says, chapter 9, the essential difference between the various economic forms of society, between, for instance, a society based on slave labor and one based on wage labor, lies only in the mode in which this surplus is in each case extracted from the direct actual producer. Notice, I don't know what else you learned about Marxism, but notice that Marx did not use the word private property. He did not use the word market. He did not use the word state. Let's read it again, this time slowly. The essential difference, the fundamental difference. Carl Linnaeus said that the fundamental difference between the chimpanzee and the lizard is the mammary gland. So if I wanted to seek the difference between the chimpanzee and the lizard, the difference will not be sought in what they look like, but rather in their mammary gland. Similarly, Karl Heinrich Marx, who is analyzing a different population, is saying that the essential difference in my categories stems from only the difference between, look at that word, it's highlighted, lies only in the mode in which this surplus is in each case extracted, pumped out of the direct producer. Let me do it again, just in case you have been misled by someone else. This time slowly. The essential difference between the economic forms lies, I've highlighted it, surplus labor is in each case extracted from the direct producer. Notice Marx's class analysis in Capital does not invoke private property, does not invoke markets, does not invoke the state. It all depends on the manner in which surplus is pumped out of the direct producer. This has gotten really serious, so I thought I'd share a comic strip with you. Some of you are interested in that kind of stuff. So what the hell is capitalism? Well, at the simplest level and the clearest level, capitalism is a combination of two things. Number one, Smith makes pizzas using not slavery, not serfdom, not cooperating. Smith receives a wage. So the first characteristic of capitalism is wage labor. But that's not the only one. As you guys know, especially in South Asia, Middle class people often have domestic servants. Those domestic servants bake pizzas, but those pizzas are never sold in the market. So, in other words, those people receive a wage, but they do not engage in, let's do it, commodity production. So, let's do this. Capitalism, if you want to look at any business, any act of production, any site of inputs being converted into an output. For example, the omelette that I prepared 3 hours ago, I used my nerves and muscles and converted an input, eggs, into an output, omelette. I neither performed wage labor nor sold it in the market. Thus, this omelette is not a capitalist product. You with me, guys? Okay. So to reiterate, capitalism equals commodity production plus wage labor. Here's a joke. The first man says to the capitalist, he says, "What did you tell that man just now?" The capitalist says, "I told him to work faster." "How much do you pay him?" $15 a day. How much? Where did you get the money to pay him? He asks. The capitalist says, "I sell products." "Who makes the products?" "He does." "How many products does he make in one day?" $50 worth. Then instead of you paying him, he pays you $35 a day to tell him to work faster? "Well, I own the machines," says the capitalist. "How did you get the machines?" asks the Marxist economist. "I sold products and bought them." "And who made those products?" "Shut up, or he might hear you." This is going to be a good lesson in a business and how to think about a business. As promised, Marx's Capital is about how capital works. So, how does a good business work? If you ask any business person, they're going to tell you, if they're honest at least, that a good business in capitalism, and I want to emphasize that because we can have other kind of businesses, we can have cooperatives, as we will argue at the end. A good business in capitalism is defined as a business when you can sell something for more than what it costs to make it. That's a rather simple definition, but it points out to us the following problem. If the person who made this bottle wants to sell this for more than what it costs to make it, and the person who made the shoes wants to sell that thing for more than what it costs to make it, and the person who made the bread wants to do the same thing, and the person who made the house wants to do the same, you get the picture. If everyone wants to do this, i.e. sell their thing at more than what it costs to make it, how the hell does everyone make a profit? I'm really confused now. I'm really worried. This is exactly the problem that physiocrats, mercantilists, and bourgeois economics did not and has not ever been able to resolve. The problem of more value. Because think about it. If you say, and many people did, by the way, you would be forgiven if you came to the following conclusion that, look, I bought this for 5 and I sold it for 7. What does that have to do with labor? That was the mercantilist theory of value. What they did not realize is that when I oversell this at above its price or value, someone else has to pay more than what it costs to make it. But that implies of necessity a redistribution from person X, who sold it at a higher value, to person Y. This is a redistribution of existing value. It did not explain where the value came from. Value has to be created before it can be distributed. You can't distribute what you have not produced. If Smith had never baked those pizzas, there would be no slices for anyone. There could be no consumption without production. This is why Marx is going to invite us to take a short detour. The way I've presented the information so far is by zooming into the concept of necessary and surplus labor, what Marx is going to talk about in chapter 9. But the way he actually presents it is via the route of chapter 1 2, the discussion about commodities. So I promise you, I'm going to return to the issue of necessary and surplus labor in about 10 to 15 minutes, but I'm going to take a short detour by first discussing commodities. So here's what he's trying to achieve. It's very easy to get lost. As he himself points out in the preface, it's very easy to lose sight of the politics in capital and the political argument that he's making in chapter 9 and 10 and later. If you just focus in this scholastic kind of a way on the first 6 chapters, which are the philosophical and theoretical chapters. These are, if you like, the building blocks of the analysis that are going to be used to criticize capital later. So here's an assumption that he's going to make. Remember, I also want you guys to learn the method that he's using to arrive at the conclusions that he is. To remind you, what is he trying to achieve in volume 1? Volume 1 is about the production of surplus value, what happens inside the firm. So it makes absolutely no sense at this stage of the analysis to bring in questions of monopoly. For example, why can Microsoft sell its product at a price that's way above its value? Or to bring in questions of what happens if the government introduces a tax? Or the question of what do banks do in this story? Or to introduce the question of how do we understand the stock market? Marx says, I promise you, and I do too, I promise you, bring in these dimensions into the game. But first, I'm a human being, I can only analyze one thing at a time. So I'm going to first assume, or let's use Marx's words, I'm going to abstract from the stock market, abstract from banks, abstract from everything else that is muddying the waters. So I'm going to assume that value equals price and price equals value. At this stage of the analysis, my friends, 1 hour of labor is the same thing as $1. Why? Because it's going to simplify the analysis. And I promise you, if you're here next week and the week after that, I'm going to discuss what is called the transformation problem. How hours become prices and how prices, if you're a Resnick and Wolf student, become hours. Anyway, so let's do this. I'm going to begin with chapter 1, commodities, walk you through this discussion, and bring it back to chapter 9 and 10 from where we began, i.e. the murder of Tarun Saxena and Anna Sebastian. I promise you I'm going to return to that issue, but I'm going to do it the way Marx has done it. I'm going to begin with the following concept. What is a commodity? A commodity is a product of labor, as are all goods and services, by the way. But a commodity is a product of labor that has a very peculiar additional property. Please pay attention. A commodity is a product of labor that is transferred via a particular mode of passage known as the market mechanism. That's not the only way via which a product of labor can go from the producer to the consumer. We have had and can have and still do have modes of passage which are different from the market mechanism. Let me give you some examples. I go to the woods with my 10-year-old son. I pluck a twig from the tree and use my little knife, my nerves and muscles, and this little knife to convert this twig into a figurine which I give this little child to play with. The figurine is a product of labor which has gone from the producer to the consumer, the producer to the consumer. But the figurine is, you ready, not a commodity, because the mode of passage was a non-market mechanism. If, in contrast, I turn around as soon as my son begins to enjoy playing with the figurine, I point out that, son, that's going to be $10. I should start doing that. That's my business plan. At this, if I were to do that, and if he were to oblige, and should this quid pro quo exchange take place, I part with the figurine, he parts with $10, then the same figurine is a commodity. So let's do this again. You cannot deduce by looking at a product whether it is a commodity or not. You will need more information. A commodity is a product of labor that goes from the producer, Smith, to the consumer via the commodity production method, aka the market mechanism. Let's define this clearly. As you will see in chapter 1, Marx defines a commodity as a useful product. The chair can be used to sit. This bottle can be used to drink water. This computer can be used to communicate with people around the world, etc., etc., etc. Every commodity is a useful product of labor that has one additional quality. It is freely. Freely. What does that mean? You didn't slap me. You didn't jail me. You didn't control my mobility in any sense, freely in the coercive sense of the term. It is freely exchanged on the market. That is, it is transferred from the producer to the consumer via, and this is the key point, a quid pro quo exchange. It has to be an exchange of equals. It has to be an exchange of equal values. Quid pro quo exchange. I part with 6 hours worth of labor embodied in shoes. You part with 6 hours worth of labor embodied in a loaf of bread, and you and I exchange our commodities. 6 hours, 6 hours. Okay, let's do a short analytical exercise. I'm going to give you 3 examples or 3 situations, and hopefully on or someone is going to be looking at the comments. So let me know in the comments, guys. We have 3 scenarios. Which of these 3 are, according to the definition that I just provided, a commodity, and which one of these is not? I'm going to wait for 25 to 30 to 45 seconds, and hopefully it's going to give you a chance to think about it yourself. I'm going to wait for 25 to 30 seconds. What do you think? Your friend fixes your computer, i.e., she provides a service. You offer to pay her for this service, but she refuses. Is this service that your friend provided to you, is this a commodity or a non-commodity? Hopefully, you have deduced that No quid pro quo exchange took place. Thus, this is not a commodity. Let's do the second one. You go to your local store, you pick up a bag of chips, Doritos, you take it to the counter, you part with a certain amount of money, and you take this bag of chips with you. The retailer parts with the bag of chips, and you part with a certain some pieces of paper known as money. Quid pro quo exchange takes place. The chips are an item that has utility. You can consume them and grow fat. I'm sorry, you can consume them and enjoy a lovely meal, and you get that use value, while the retailer gets that sum of money. Quid pro quo exchange. As you can see, the bag of chips, Doritos, is a commodity. Very good, Kesser. Awesome. Crazy Reddit vid says 1 and 3 are not. Very good. Awesome. Very good, guys. Excellent. So the third example is that Russian czars, and Marx gives this exact example, by the way, at the end of chapter 1. He says that Russian czars can forcibly just appropriate the rice produce from the farmers. In this case, there is coercion, there is physical coercion. The exchange was not a free exchange. When you were not looking, I stole your computer. That is not an exchange. That's called, in capitalism at least, theft. Okay, so I hope you got that. 1 and 3 are not commodities, while 2 is a commodity. Okay, now here's what Marx does. He's going to do the following. Literally, in the first 3 paragraphs, this is what he does. He says, let's start with the commodity. This could be a chair, a pizza, a house, a shirt, whatever you prefer. And let's ask 2 questions about it. Let's use, you ready? Abstraction to understand the similarities and differences between things. What makes a chair different from a pizza? Okay, when I focus on, you ready, guys, the qualitative aspects of this problem, what makes a chair qualitatively similar or different from the pizza, I realize that the chair and the slice of pizza are qualitatively different use values. One is used to nourish the body, the other is used to sit on. They have qualitatively different use values. I hope that's clear. But what makes them similar? What makes them similar is that 50 pizzas are the same value as 1 chair. What? Let's do this again. Marx, the Hegelian dialectician, is using abstraction and asking the following question: what is similar between a chair, a pizza, a Mercedes? What he discovers is that in varying proportions, the following statement makes logical sense. 1 billion toothpicks are the same thing as, you get the picture, 1,000. Sorry, let me do that. Let's use another example. 1 billion toothpicks are the same thing as 5 Ferraris. What? $50 pizzas are the same thing in terms of their price as 1 chair. What is he doing? He's saying, this is exactly the words he's going to use, guys. He's going to say, once I abstract from their qualitative differences, I'm left with their quantitative relationship known as exchange value. How much of X is equal to how much of Y? Exchange value. To make sense of exchange value, I'll have to abstract from the fact that the chair is used to sit on while the car is used to transport my body from location A to B. So Marx, the Hegelian, is going to start with commodities in general. He's going to point out to you that all the commodities of the world at this stage of the analysis are identical in the precise sense that they're all products of human labor. But notice what has happened. As soon as I abstract from the qualitative attributes that make the chair what it is, and the qualitative attributes of the pizza that make it what it is, as soon as I abstract from those qualitative differences, that moment is the same moment when I abstracted from the laborer who made the chair and the laborer who baked the pizzas. At this stage of the analysis, you ready? I have abstracted from, another word, concrete forms of labor so that I can focus on abstract labor. Just as Carl Linnaeus pointed out that what is common between the chimpanzee and the horse is the attribute called mammalia. Similarly, the attribute that is common between the person who baked the pizzas and the person who played the violin and the person who performed the brain surgery is that they are all exercises of human nerves and muscles to convert an input into an output. At this stage of the analysis, Marx points out that the secret of value, by the way, Marx himself considers this his primary contribution to Capital. So pay attention. He says that the value of a product, I cannot exaggerate the importance of what I'm about to say. Adam Smith and David Ricardo and bourgeois political economy could not solve this problem for 100 years because they did not have Hegel's abstract method. Marx points out that the value of any product is equal to the abstract labor time required to make it. What does that mean? Wow. That means that in the 1 hour of physical time, i.e., 60 minutes, defined in the physical sense of the term, a surgeon could be emitting more value than a construction worker. It opens up the possibility to differences in skill, training, and subjective evaluations of occupations. Because the surgeon spent 10, 15, 20 more years learning from the teachers and the lab assistants who, used their nerves and muscles to train this individual who is now a surgeon. The labor of my teachers as I speak is embodied in what I am doing right now, so that what I am doing right now would have been impossible without the labor performed by Stephen Resnick on my mind. In other words, I'm emitting the labor that is embodied inside me via the labor of a man who died on January 2nd, 2013. We're all products of other people's labor. Think about it for a second. Your entry into this world is known as, go to the maternity ward and ask them, it's called labor. You were brought into this world as an act of labor. When your grandma told you stories, that was an act of care labor. When you went to school and learned how to add 5 plus 2, your math teacher was performing labor. When you went into that games period, your nerves and muscles were developing because the games teacher was performing labor. so on and so forth, until you arrive with this degree in your hand in computer science and get a job in Microsoft. At this point, imagine that there's a pipe connected to your head with all the 20, 30 years of embodied labor inside you, and that is now going to flow from your nerves and muscles inside the firm. Okay. Now, this is where we're going to dive into some of the nuances of Marx's theory. Marx is going to distinguish between what he's going to call the circuits of commodity exchange, when one commodity exchanges for the other, versus what he's going to call the circuit of capital. I'm going to do this in the following way. The first way of thinking about it is to think about the circuit C to C. Imagine that I made shoes and you made bread. And let's say that both of these, for argument's sake, were produced in 6 hours of labor each. I performed 6 hours of labor to convert leather into shoes. You performed 6 hours of labor to convert the flour into slices of bread. Make sense? 6 hours of labor. And assume that the skill level and blah, 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 all of that is the same. Now, what's happening here is that my shoes are being exchanged for your bread. Commodity, commodity. I wanted the bread that you baked, and you wanted the shoes that I made. 6 hours, 6 hours, exchange of equals, everyone's happy. It would make no sense, as you can see, to exchange shoes for shoes, bread for bread, chairs for chairs. It would make absolutely no sense. If I said, why don't you take this bottle and give me your bottle of water, you would say they look identical. What does that mean? That means is that the reason why C to C takes place, or the circuit of commodity exchange takes place, has to do with the fact that the persons engaged in doing this are doing this on the premise that the two products, chairs and shoes, are qualitatively different but quantitatively identical. You with me? They're qualitatively different. They have different utilities, but they're quantitatively identical. 6 hours equals 6 hours. They have the same exchange value. This is critical, guys. Let me do it again. Punchline. The secret of commodity exchange. Whenever we discuss the market, this is what's happening in the market. This is why I said that Marxism is not a critique of markets. Because Marx says, his words, he says, the sphere of commodity exchange is the Eden of equality. It's the place where 6 hours is going to exchange for 6 hours, equal for equal. And if you try to trick me by selling me something that was worth 6 hours and you try to get 15 hours from me, that trade is not going to take place. I'm going to walk away, because this is a relationship between equals. Okay, keep that in mind. This is not true for what we're going to call the circuits of capital. Notice that I'm using the plural circuits. Why? Again, in the circuit of commodity exchange, C is changed with C. It matters precious little that historically what has happened is that we went from a system called barter, where literally shoes changed hands with bread, to a system where people realize that this is really difficult to achieve. Why not invent? Why not come up with a universal commodity that embodies 6 hours worth of labor? So here's another way of doing it. I have 6 hours worth of shoes in my hands. I go to the market and sell it for $6. converting my 6 hours of shoes into $6. And now I take those $6 with which I can buy anything else in the world of equal value. So if you look at the history of money, for example, for those of you who are interested in this kind of stuff, money predates capitalism by thousands of years. We have coins and coinage from the caliphs Harun Rashid. We have coinage from ancient Mesopotamia and all the rest of it. Money predates capitalism, but the function of money changes with capitalism. Let me say that again. Money used to be a means of payment and exchange. What kind of exchange? Exchange of equals. The circuit of commodity exchange demonstrates that the criticism of capital that you and I seek is not to be found in the market mechanism, because there we have an Eden of equality. Then what is capital? Capital begins with money and ends with money. The circuit of commodity exchange begins with shoes and ends with bread. The circuit of capital begins with money and ends with money. Qualitative identity. Money is money. Then why the hell did we do it? That's weird. You gave me money and I gave it back to you. That makes no sense. The only way this can make sense is, if you're ready, let's use abstraction again. You have similar qualities. Money is money at the start and at the end of the circuit, but different quantities. There is more money at the end than what we began with. The aim of this circuit, the circuit of capital, please, this is the punchline. The aim of the circuit of capital is to use money to make money. And when that happens, excuse me, and when that happens, when money is used to make more money, we say that money has acted as capital. So what I have just shown you is the following. I have $50 in my account. I go to the market and purchase 10 pizzas worth $50. And I don't eat them. The purpose of doing this little dance was not to eat the pizzas, but rather to resell them to someone else. I got these pizzas for $50 and I found you, for whatever reason, you purchased these from me for $60. My 50 has become 60. In this case, we have the example of merchant capital, buying in order to sell. However, as the more perceptive amongst you may have already noticed, how can everyone keep buying in order to sell pizzas if no pizzas are ever produced? That is to say, how the hell can the merchant be doing this? How can he be selling pizzas if there are no pizzas that are produced? So to analyze that, we have to look at the second circuit of capital. This is called the circuit of industrial capital. All that it means is that we've introduced the notion of production into the story. You with me? So here's the story now. The capitalist has a sum of money M. We're going to start from the left and start reading it towards the right, left to right. The capitalist starts with a sum of money M. He goes into the market and purchases means of production, non-labor inputs, and labor power. M has become transformed into two commodities, labor power and raw material, machines, etc. You with me? My $100, I used 50 of those to buy some nails, some saw, some paint, some wood, etc., etc., means of production. And 50 of that was spent on the worker who's going to use his nerves and muscles to turn the wood, saw, and nails into a new product called a chair. Okay, let's do this. I'm the owner of money. I convert my M into two kinds of commodities. These commodities are now, let's do it, consumed in a process called production, which gives birth to a new commodity called chairs, which are sold in the market for more than what it costs to do this. Let me repeat. Step one. In the circuit of industrial capital, the owner of money goes to the market and purchases two kinds of commodities, means of production and labor power. Step one. Step two, she consumes these two products in the process called production P. Step three, as a result of this production, a new commodity called chairs, or whatever the product is, emerges, which is pregnant with surplus value, C prime. Step four, this commodity, which is pregnant with value, is returned to the market and exchanged for M prime. Notice what has happened. In this circuit, remember what I told you guys, every single time we go to the market, we're going to assume equality. Every single time something is going to be bought or sold, you're going to say equal exchange. Every single time. Okay, so let's see. In this example, M is being exchanged with MOP and labor power, commodity with money, equal, equal. The end, new commodity for more money, equal, equal. But the first exchange is 100 with 100. The chair sold for 150. What the hell? 100 is equal to 100 at the start. Very good. 150 is equal to 150 at the end. Awesome, mathematics works, but 100 is not equal to 150. Something magical happened in this box called production. The value of the final equal exchange is greater than the value of the initial equal exchange. So here's the punchline. Between the first equal exchange and the second equal exchange, something else happened in the domain of production when you and I were not paying attention. This leads us to our next concept. What the worker does. We're going to reserve the word labor, the verb. We're going to reserve that word for the activities performed. The conversion of the inputs into an output. Smith uses his knowledge and his muscles to convert the mozzarella and the cheese and the pan and the oven and the tomatoes into a pizza. That's the act of laboring. It's a verb. What he sells, however, is not that. What he sells is a commodity. He writes in a contract. Literally, this is whenever, if you already have a job or if you ever have one, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get a contract from the employer which says, dear Mr. or Miss, you're going to come to this place Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and sell your capacity to perform labor. Wow. Your capacity to perform labor. That's what you're selling. The value of this commodity, because it is a commodity, we're going to call it labor power. The value of labor power is, let's go back to what we learned about half an hour ago. It's equal to the necessary labor. or the amount necessary to keep the worker alive. The two pizzas that Smith needs to consume himself so that he can revive and revitalize his body. Okay, I want you to pay attention to this, guys. Notice that when you wrote that contract, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, I'm going to be here, what you sold to the capitalist is the potential or the capacity to perform work, the capacity to bake pizzas, the capacity to write the software, the capacity to perform the surgery. If you're a doctor who works for a capitalist hospital, that is. Notice, what the capitalist has bought is the potential to perform labor. But when I go to the market and I get an apple from the market, what have I gotten? I've gotten the potential that I can get nourished with iron from this product. But just as you can see, if I don't consume this apple, it's going to rot and my body is not going to get the iron that it needed. Similarly, what the capitalist has bought is the capacity to perform work. His actual success at it will depend on, you ready, his consumption of Tarun Saksena's work. His ability to extract more labor from Tarun Saxena and Anna Sebastian. His ability to extract more work per hour from the workers in Foxconn, China. Because the workers of Foxconn, China have sold their capacity, ability in those 8 hours of work, Monday to Friday. There is a dictatorship in which the employer has bought your capacity to perform work. Whatever you do in those 8 hours is not yours. The principle of democracy and the principle that each person has the right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness ceases to exist as soon as you enter the hidden abode of production. This is why some of you will have those tags which you have to tag when you go in and out. This is why you get those insults from your employer. This is why what happened last week in your own life happened the way it did. Because capital wants to extract the most from what it has bought. Capital will have to monitor you. Capital will have to make your life miserable so that it can extract the utility from it. Okay, guys. I pointed out earlier, or Marx pointed out earlier, when he's looking at chapter 1, he pointed out that every commodity has these two properties, right? Every commodity has a use value and an exchange value. So let's do the same thing with the commodity called labor power. Well, does labor power have an exchange value? Yes, it does. It's called a wage. How is the wage or the value of labor power determined? It's determined exactly the way the value of any other commodity is determined. It's determined by the average cost of making that product. So what is the average cost or the lowest cost way of making a worker? As you will see, as you can see already, the capacity to perform labor or labor power cannot exist outside my body and my mind. So that my existence as a species or a race of people who live by selling their labor power is a necessary condition for the existence of capital. So the exchange value of labor power is the least amount of money the buyer, i.e. the capitalist in this case, can part with to get the use value of labor power. So what is that use value? Just as the use value of the apple is that I can use it to nourish my body with iron, and the use value of the chair is that I can use it to sit on so that I don't get tired. The use value of the commodity called labor power is that when it is consumed, it adds value to things. So the use value of labor power is that it is a source of value. Now think about it. If capitalists can get this use value from anywhere in the world, just as you and I can get our apples from Gilgit or from Zimbabwe, what we're going to compare in that case as buyers of apples is the quality of the product, the price of the product. If we have two apples, one made in Harare and the other made in Gilgit, but they have the exact same quality, the same sweetness, the blah, 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 then the only thing that I'm going to compare is what? Their exchange value, the price. Similarly, Tim Cook and Elon Musk and all the others, when they're deciding where to produce their iPhone or their computer or anything else, or their t-shirts, etc., when they think about the problem, they think about it in exactly the same way. What is the cheapest way of getting a shirt produced? Once you start asking that question, you immediately realize that we have these helpless millions of women in Bangladesh who'd be willing to do that at a price, at an exchange value that is lower than what it would cost in Norway. Why? Because it costs less to live as a Bangladeshi person than it does to live as a Norwegian person. Why? Because Bangladesh was a colony and Norway was not. Why? Because Bangladeshi women live in a state of helplessness known as gendered class exploitation, and as a result are willing to accept the humiliation of receiving 2 cents for a shirt that's going to be sold for $30 in Stockholm. Okay. So what then is capital? I promised you we're going to give you clear definitions. Capital is the process via which money becomes more money. M becoming M prime via the exploitation of workers is called capitalism. When you go to the market and use your money to buy a shirt, that money is not capital. But when H&M uses that money to buy the labor power of the workers in Dhaka to make a shirt that's going to be sold for more than what it costs to make it, H&M's money has acted as capital. Okay. Some of you are already tired. You can watch this video later when you get the time. But if you're up for it, I'm going to continue with the last phase of my lecture. Let's go back to our friend Smith. At that point in time, I didn't tell you whether Smith was baking these pizzas in conditions of slavery or wage labor or serfdom. I didn't say anything about that. I'm going to say something about that now. Let's say that Smith works for a company that Pakistanis know a lot about called Papa John's. The value of a pizza or any other commodity in the world, a chair, a car, a house, can be divided into 2 parts. Later, I'm going to divide it into 3 parts, but at this stage of the analysis, let's divide it into 2 parts. The value of the pizza or the chair or the car or anything else you like can be divided into 2 parts: the value of its non-labor inputs. Marx uses the romantic term dead labor, plus the labor performed by Smith Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Notice, I'm not talking about Smith's wage here. I'm talking about the value added by Smith while converting the mozzarella and the pan into the pizza. Stay with me, huh? It's the value added by Smith, not the value received by Smith. That's the value of labor power. So let's do it. The value of a pizza at this stage of the analysis can be divided into 2 parts: dead labor, i.e., the labor that came from another production process, plus living labor, the process of making the pizza. Now let's follow Papa John's. Papa John, like a good industrial capitalist, steals money from Pakistani people and goes to the market and buys two kinds of inputs. The first input that Papa John gets is dead labor. So they go to the market, they buy some cheese, they buy some dough, they buy some tomatoes, they buy some olives, they buy some mushrooms, they buy this instrument called a pan and an oven, and all of this costs them $100. You with me? Because these are all commodities. We're in the world of CMC, exchange of equivalents. So the cheese was worth what it was sold at. The dough, the tomato, olive, mushroom, you get the picture. Everything was sold at its value. This total gives us $100. I'm going to make the simplifying assumption that once we make the 20 slices, my pan and my oven doesn't work anymore. It's completely depreciated. Why did I do this? As I will point out, hopefully in the final lecture, Marx is going to introduce the concept of the turnover rate in volume 3. But right now, I don't want to bring that into the story. So I'm going to do what the old man did. I'm going to abstract from that and say that all the fixed capital depreciates in one circuit. Okay, now let's do the following. Please stay with me, guys. I know that I'm going to conclude very, very soon, I promise. Let's follow Papa John's. Papa John's went to the market and bought non-labor inputs, cheese, mozzarella, blah, blah, blah. So far, Papa John's has not hired the services of Smith. But let's say, for argument's sake, and this is going to be a fun hypothetical exercise, let's say that for argument's sake, as soon as Papa John's got these non-labor inputs and put them in their car and went home and put the cheese in the fridge, they realized that I don't want to bake pizzas anymore. So imagine, for argument's sake, please stay with me, it's going to demonstrate something to you. If PJ decides, I don't want to bake any pizzas anymore, I don't want to sell pizzas anymore, I hate this line of business. How much value can PJ recuperate by returning those items? PJ got 100 worth of stuff, went home, put the mozzarella in the fridge, but then suddenly something happened. They said, I don't want to make these pizzas anymore. How much value can PJ recuperate by returning these items? Of course, if you were the person who had to buy this mozzarella at Papa John's whims for 120 instead of 100, you would point out to them, you would like, what are you charging us for? The service of holding the mozzarella in your fridge? That's not a value addition. We will give you 100 for 100. Why? Because we're in the domain of the Eden of equality, and here 100 will only change hands with 100. So here's the punchline. Marx uses the word constant capital to refer to the amount of value spent on non-labor inputs. This exercise that I just performed with you, where PJ decides to bake pizzas but then decides not to, has demonstrated to you that a value of $100 exists in the future pizzas that Smith is going to bake in the future, even before a single one has been baked. Even before he baked those 20 slices that he did, $100 worth of value already existed in the system. But that $100 is going to remain at 100, hence the word constant capital, unless Papa John's decides to go ahead with production. So remember, the aim of capital is to convert 100 to 120, 120 to 150, 150 to 2. You get the picture? But PJ can't do that if they just keep buying and selling things. PJ isn't a problem. Let's dive deeper. I just told you that the value of anything can be at the first stage of analysis divided into two parts. the value that already exists before baking the pizzas, plus the new value that Smith is going to add. So now let's divide, as Marx does, the value of any product into three parts. Marx is going to call the value added V plus S. Do this again, guys. The amount of money spent by Papa John's on mozzarella, cheese, pans, and ovens, non-labor inputs, is going to be represented by the symbol C, constant capital. Constant capital. Why are we calling it constant? Because, as I pointed out, leaving things in your fridge to rot does not add value to things. Constant capital. Old value. But to make a profit, Papa John's has to add value in the process of production, and this new value added is going to be divided into two parts, V plus S. V is going to be called variable capital. This is equal to the wage received by Smith, and S is surplus value that Smith made but never received. Let's give it some numbers. Let's say that the pizza is sold for, the 20 slices are sold for $140. As you can see, $100 worth of value existed in the system even before baking a single item, to which 40 was added, such that the total value of the 20 pizzas is equal, 20 slices is equal to $140. This can be divided into three parts: the old value that existed before we started producing, plus Smith's wage, plus the surplus value produced by Smith but never received. W equals C plus V plus S. The value of any product can be divided into three parts: the part spent on non-labor inputs, the part spent on the worker's wage, and the part received by the capitalist in the form of surplus value. Smith worked for 40 hours and received 20 hours worth of labor. Smith worked, the value of the work he performed is $40. That's the new value he added, and he only received $20 worth of value. So now we have a definition of class exploitation. Marx is going to define class exploit, and I'm going to give you a general term, and you can fill in the blanks as and when you please. Class exploitation is the process in society which refers to the appropriation of surplus by, fill in the name of the appropriator, due to, fill in the blank with the reason. Let me give you an example. For example, some of my friends on the left say that filling this blank with the word comrade commissar is going to result in socialism. Fortunately, neither Marx nor Lenin nor Mao Zedong believed that the Soviet Union or China are socialist. Why? Because here's what they said. This is a society in which the appropriation of surplus by, let's fill in the blanks, comrade commissar, due to state capitalism. You fill in the blanks here and the sentence is going to make perfect sense. Let's do another one. Feudalism is the appropriation of surplus by, fill in the blanks, landlord, due to serfdom. Capitalism is the appropriation of surplus by the employer due to wage labor. You get the picture? Slavery is the appropriation of surplus by the slave. You get the picture, guys. I'll do two examples. You're already familiar with capitalism because you live in it. How does this play itself out in feudalism? In European feudalism, for those of you who don't know, there were two kinds of lands. There were those that were called the private lands of the landlord, and there were those that were called the public lands or the common lands. And the rule was that Monday to Friday, you worked on the landlord's land. And if you did that like a good boy, an obedient servant of the landlord, you got the privilege of working on the common land on day 6, on Saturday. Whatever you did Monday to Friday, you worked, you toiled, but it was for the landlord to keep. Whatever you did on Saturday was for yourself to keep. And on Sunday, you both, as the landlord and the serf, went to church and apologized. So in this case, necessary labor would be equal to the amount of value received on Saturday, whereas the surplus labor would be the labor performed Monday to Friday. Okay, guys. Concept number 4. This is gonna be the last stage of my analysis. As I promised, this lecture is dedicated to Tarun Saxena, Anna Sebastian, and the Foxconn workers who commit suicides on production lines. It's also dedicated to the women of Bangladesh who stitch our clothes and the workers of Nike in Vietnam and Cambodia who make our shoes. What if, Marx asks in chapter 10, we map this story that I just told you onto the working day? Look at this. Point A represents 9 a.m. Point C represents 5 p.m. And point B, let's say for argument's sake, represents lunch break. Monday to Friday, I perform, and you perform, and Tarun Saxena performed work from A to C. Let's assume for argument's sake that it took roughly 4 hours for Tarun Saxena to go from A to B, such that Tarun Saxena produced his wage in that particular point in time. In 4 hours, Tarun Saxena reproduced the wage that he is going to receive from Bajaj Finance. In 4 hours, the workers of Foxconn produced the wage that they're going to receive from Apple, or Foxconn in this case. But they can't stop working at that point. They're going to have to work for 8 hours. In the remaining 4 hours from B to C, Tarun Saxena, Foxconn workers, you and me continue to perform work, but we're not going to receive any of it. From B to C, we're performing surplus labor, and whatever work we perform is going to be for the master to keep. So here's the question. What is the incentive for the capitalist in this situation? Hopefully you can see. Let's take an example. This is just some numbers here. Let's say that our worker works for 8 hours and makes $160 worth of value. That's the labor she did, so that she emitted $20 of value per hour. In 8 hours, she made 160, and in wages, she got 100. In this case, as you can see, the surplus value is $60 per day. She reproduced her salary in the first 5 hours. At 9 a.m., she went to work. By 2 p.m., she had reproduced her salary. And from 2 to 5, she was just working gratis, unpaid labor that the capitalist is going to call their profit. So what is the capitalist's incentive here? As you can see, the first method is to extend C to the right. Instead of asking Tarun Saxena to work till 5 p.m., they can say, no new orders have been now in place. You can't leave before 9 p.m. So one way of extending the surplus value, of increasing the surplus value, is what Marx is going to call absolute surplus value. Absolute surplus value. What does that mean? When the capitalist moves C to the right and expects more work with the same pay, the working day has been extended, and we say that the capitalist's resulting profits are the result of absolute surplus value. This is why the first class struggles in history, in capitalist history that is, were precisely over the working day. Every year, workers around the world except the country in which this rebellion took place, celebrate, commemorate the memory of the workers of Chicago who laid down their lives for the 8-hour working day on May 1st, 1886. This is exactly why there was a struggle. Now, capitalists realize this. Capitalists know that there are limits to how much you can do this. As you can see, Tarun Saxena and Sebastian Foxconn suicides were reported by the media, and it gave bad press to the capitalists. So, in other words, capitalists realize that there are both legal as well as political as well as cultural limits to absolute surplus value. So, what's the other way of doing it? Hopefully, you can see that you can pull. One way is doing is to push C to the right. This is called absolute surplus value. The other is to move B to the left. This is called relative surplus value. What does that mean? For example, artificial intelligence is all the wrath these days. People are talking a lot about it. All that it's going to do is reduce the necessary labor time so that the worker can spend the remaining time doing more surplus labor. It increases the productivity of the worker. There are three ways of doing this. One way of pulling B to the left towards A is to install new technology that emits more in the same amount of time. That's one way. Another way of doing it is to depress wages directly. For example, capital has moved, as you know, in the last 4 to 5 decades to China, to India, to Mexico, to Brazil, to Vietnam. Why? Is it because of some love for non-European people? No, it's not. It has to do with moving B to the left. Another way of doing it is to expect the worker to speed up. Instead of producing $20 an hour, Tarun Saxena is now expected to produce $30 per hour. Remember what I said earlier. Read that line that I asked you to write down. Died due to more targets, died due to the inability to meet the target. Speeding up the pace of work, relative surplus value. Final point, I promise. We learned in this seminar that capitalism is based on a social theft. It's a theft. Every single day, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, when people go to work, they experience a social theft. They produce value that they're not going to receive. Now let's put some numbers to this. I used the data from the United States. This is 4 or 5 years old, but it proves the same point. From what are called the national income and product accounts, to calculate and give you a sense of the rate of exploitation in the richest country on the planet. So here's what we're going to do. If I took out the difference between the value of output produced in the US and subtract from it the value of the non-labor inputs, the mozzarella, cheese, pans, ovens, blah, blah, blah. If I took the total product and subtracted from it the value of the non-labor inputs, or let's use the word, the constant capital C, let me do this just to make sure, look at this. If I subtracted from W the value C, W minus C equals V plus S, right? Okay. So here's what I did. I subtracted from the total value produced by an average worker in the US. I subtracted from the total output produced, the value of the output. I subtracted the value of the materials going into production, and that gave me an average value added by an average worker in the US as $163,000 per year. The average wage of a manufacturing sector worker is roughly $30,000 a year for non-supervisory workers. You're smart people. 163 minus 30,000 gives me a value added minus wage equals surplus value of 133K per worker per year. Now let's do this on an hourly basis. I'm assuming the standard metric in which Workers work roughly 8 hours a day for 40 hours a week, and give or take a couple of weeks based on vacations, etc. I'm going to use the number 2070 hours per year. Okay, let's do this. 163,000 value is added per worker per year, divided by 2070 hours. That gives me, you ready, a value added per hour of 78.74. What does that mean? Every single hour, workers in the United States add new value worth $78. They got 14.5 per hour. Very close to the minimum wage, huh? Let's do this. 78.7 minus 14.5 gives me $64 of social theft per hour in the most advanced capitalist country on the planet. Every hour, workers in the United States produce $64 worth of unpaid labor. Do the math. Let's calculate what Marx called the rate of exploitation. Rate of exploitation. To remind you, the rate of exploitation is a concept given by, what the hell happened? It's given by the identity unpaid labor divided by paid labor, or S over V. What do you see? Based on this data that I presented to you, we get a rate of exploitation of 443%. What does that mean? For every $1 a worker in the United States produces to reproduce their wage, they have to produce 4 times as much in surplus value. For every dollar you receive, you pay them for. So what is capitalism? Capitalism is a system of exploitation premised on M to M prime. Can there be varieties of capitalism? Yes. Can there be varieties of mammals? Yes. Are they different? Yes. Are they similar? Yes. We can use what are called in grammar noun adjuncts to arrive at varieties. And some people like to do that, as you know. When you ask them, do you think capitalism is a problem? They're going to say, no, I think capitalism is great. The problem is with crony capitalism. No, I think capitalism is great. The problem is with third world. You can keep adding noun adjuncts to arrive at varieties of capitalism, as we have seen all across the world. But the fundamental feature is M to M prime. Final point. Whatever I have said is equally applicable to USSR, China, Vietnam, so on and so forth. If you don't believe me, you can look at the writings of their founders and discern the same. So what then would be socialism? Capitalism, as I have tried to demonstrate in this seminar, is not a system of markets. Thus, socialism is not a system without markets. Socialism is not about planning. That's not how we would define it. Can we have socialism with planning? Yes. Can we have socialism without planning? Yes. Let's do the same thing, by the way. Can we have capitalism with planning? Yes. Between 1940 to 1944, the United States was operating as a planned economy that did not turn it into a socialist economy. Okay. So we're no longer defining capitalism, Marxists never did, as a system of markets. Markets predate capitalism by thousands of years. Where else were the slaves being bought and sold? Not a system of markets. Capitalism is not a system of private property, because then our definition of socialism would be a system with public property. Marx's Capital gives you a new definition. Capitalism is defined as the appropriation of surplus value by non-producers. So what would be its abolition looking like? Let's use Hegelian negation. Let's negate this sentence at the top. What is socialism? It would be the appropriation of surpluses by Smith, by Tarun Saxena, by Anna Sebastian, by the workers who make iPhones products themselves. I'll stop here, guys, and I'll take your conclusions. I'll take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, comrade. That was absolutely brilliant. I, for one, am not tired and really enjoyed it.
Really?
So, we have several questions. वैसे तो पूरी discussion throughout the session लोग engage कर रहे थे with one another in the comments, so that's very
Mm.
nice. If anyone still has any questions and you haven't typed them in the chat, please do so. So the first question is by Amaz Khan. He asks if we take techno-feudalism, as Yanis Varoufakis calls it, as evolved capitalism in 21st century, how does the relation of capital change between cloud capitalists from the terrestrial capitalists?
Thank you, Maz. That's an amazing question, man. By the way, for next week, we're going to look at digital capitalism as our kind of thing. That's my field of research, as you know. So thank you for that question. So the question is, for those of you who don't know, Yanis Varoufakis, Professor Yanis Varoufakis, who's an amazing Greek Marxist economist, written multiple books about it. He wrote this book called Techno-Feudalism, where the idea is that these big, large giants, tech giants, like Microsoft, Nvidia, Apple, and all the rest of it, what are called the mega seven, so to speak, in S&P 500 circles, they appropriate or receive monopoly rents from everyone else. What does that mean? Think about it for a second. I just told you in this lecture that the value of anything is equal to the labor embodied in it, right? Or the cost of making it. So my question is, how much does it cost Microsoft for you to download one more copy of Microsoft Office? As you can see, it's already available online. If Microsoft wanted to, this download could be free because that's already there, right? So the marginal cost, as we call it in economics, the additional cost of selling an additional product, in this case, Microsoft Windows, is zero, right? Okay. So here's what's going to happen. The Bangladeshi textile manufacturer or the Pakistani textile supplier who produces goods and services and sells them at a value W is also going to have to part with, you ready, a rent in the form of paying Microsoft something which costs nothing. This is a kind of a rent. And in this precise sense, Professor Varoufakis wants you guys and myself to call this techno-feudalism. Because remember, in feudalism, the distribution is rent, right? I happen to agree as well as disagree with this thesis. I'm going to argue, and I wrote a paper about this called Consumption, Capital, and Class in Digital Space for Rethinking Marxism. I can share it with you for those of you who are interested. My argument is that rent is one of the possibilities. So is it possible to think about this in terms of rent? Yes. But we cannot, as Varoufakis and other Christian Fuchs, etc., have generalized this into one story. All of it is not rent. So, for example, consider the iPhone as a product. They like to say that it's designed in California and assembled in China. If you think about the iPhone, you will begin to realize that some part of the work that goes into producing this is performed in California. For example, the Indian engineers who were hired by Microsoft and Apple, who got their degree from IIT, for example, look at Sundar Pichai, who's the CEO of Google, IIT Kharagpur, so on and so forth. Do this exercise and you'll notice a pattern that Indian engineers trained by the socialist public sector of India, the same is true for Pakistani doctors, by the way, were trained by these poor countries and hired by Microsoft, Apple, blah, 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 who now make these workers perform the work that they do, making the software, writing the code, in the case of Amazon, the cloud data services and all the rest of it. But that's not the only work that's being done. Apple gets its cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example. That's a product that goes into this particular thing, this device. Lithium from Chile or Peru. Now, as you can see, there is a link between what you call the digital or the cloud world, I think that's the word you used, versus the terrestrial world. I like that way of thinking about it. I like to call it digital versus physical. So there is a link between them, such that, as you will see next week when we discuss supply chains, I'm going to argue precisely along those lines that what I talked about today, the rate of surplus value, is going to determine how Tim Cook designs his supply chains. You with me? So indeed, yes, that's a long-winded answer to the question. I partially agree with the thesis of techno-feudalism, but that's not the only possibility. As hopefully I'll try to convince you next week, Google and Meta, companies that basically make money by showing people ads, right? Do it differently. It depends on which business we're analyzing. So techno-feudalism is one of the possibilities, certainly, yes.
All right, thank you, comrade. The second question is from Aaron. It says, I was having a discussion with someone this week where they said that marginalism debunks the labor theory of value. Um, I think they describe different phenomena as I asked him how marginalism explains valorization. I mean, this can be taken as a comment or a question. You can respond to it in any way you want.
No, it's both. So again, for those of you who don't know, marginalism, as it is called, is an Austrian school in economics that, at least in my view, emerged because Marx had thoroughly and convincingly demonstrated that if you take the labor theory of value to its logical conclusion, remember, labor theory of value was due to Adam Smith and David Ricardo. If you extend the labor theory of value to its logical conclusion, it leads to what I just described, the exploitation of labor by capital. So Bohm Bawark and Karl Menger and a few other thinkers, there's a range of thinkers that were inspired by the Walrasian tradition, as it's called in some circles, the Austrian in the other. There's some links between them. They came up with another idea, and I want you guys to appreciate this idea as well. They said that Marx and Smith and Ricardo are wrong. The source of value is not labor. You ready? The source of value is the subjective pleasure I derive from the purchase of the commodity. This is called utility, or the utility theory of value, or the subjective theory of value. Here's the idea. You ready? Their story is that when you and I go to the market as consumers, we look at and compare the additional or the marginal utility, hence the word marginalism, the additional utility that I'm going to get from buying an additional toothpaste, or the additional utility or pleasure I'm going to get by buying one more chair or one more car. You get the picture? Now, here's the idea. They say that when the consumer goes to the market, the consumer goes to Walmart and looks at this encyclopedia, this universe of commodities, and they perform then this calculus. They compare the additional pleasure from the purchase of an underwear with the additional pleasure from purchasing a toothbrush, with the additional pleasure from consuming a loaf of bread, with the additional pleasure of buying shoes. And then you compare that additional pleasure with the price that you have to pay for it. If you're laughing already, my apologies. I'm not misrepresenting the theory. This is exactly the neoclassical economics that I had to pass exams in, and students still have to. This is called, Google it, the equi-marginal principle. Equi-marginal principle, which states that the way the consumer decides to shop has to do with the marginal utility per dollar, which has to be equal for all the items purchased. And hence, since capitalism is such an amazing system, the marginal utility is exactly equal to the price. Isn't that amazing? The same principle, they say, applies in the domain of production, where, you ready? Here's the story. The marginal product provided by the worker is exactly equal to the wage received by the worker. The marginal product of capital is exactly equal to the interest received by the person who gave the loan. And the marginal product of, you get the picture? This is a story that leads to the view that capitalism is the fairest system in the world. You see, the worker did some work exactly equal to $50, and he or she received $50. The mozzarella was $50, and it was received for $50. The entrepreneur, whatever that word means, did some amazing thing, and the surplus value is the reward for his or her marginal. You get the picture? So that theory, it's not a theory as far as I'm concerned, it's more of an ideology, was designed to justify capitalism. Because after Marx's critique of political economy, marginalism emerged as the only way of dealing with the crisis of thought that Marx had created. So they had to shun the labor theory of value altogether. So bourgeois economics is now in this shamefaced kind of insulted phase of its existence, or vulgar economics as Marx likes to call it, because while they refer to Adam Smith as the father of modern economics, no one reads Adam Smith anymore either.
All right. Thank you, comrade. The next one is from Asif Khan. He's asking, if there is equal exchange in the market, how does the contradiction between use value and exchange value arise?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but the contradiction between use value and exchange value is a concept that Marx and particularly David Harvey, a recent thinker and intellectual, has popularized in the following way. So remember, what is use value? Use value is the utility of the product, right? For example, the utility of a product of a house is that I can live in that particular space, right? That's the utility of that product. The exchange value of the product is, the house in this case, is that it costs $1 million, for argument's sake. Now, here's a contradiction for you. In China, in the US, in every capitalist country in the world, we see the following. We see houses and apartments, and we see those houses and apartments, we look at them, entire cities exist, by the way, of unoccupied apartments, unoccupied houses, unoccupied land, and at the same time, we see homeless people on the streets. Isn't that amazing? Let me do that again. We see in capitalism the irrationality of homes without people and people without homes at the same time. That is to say, if we had found a better way of organizing this, the use value, the potential use value of the home could become a real use value so that this person could actually get access to it, yet they will not. Why? Because this homeless person does not have the exchange value to pay for that apartment. You with me? The contradiction between use value and exchange value. Let's do another one. Amartya Sen, who's a Nobel Prize laureate in economics, one of the only Nobel laureates that I actually respect, wrote this beautiful book called Poverty and Famines. And that book deals with the question of why children starve in Africa, Asia, Latin America. It's a book about the question of starvation and poverty and famines. So the book begins with a really beautiful line. He says, starvation is not the characteristic of there not being enough food to eat. Starvation is the characteristic of some people not having enough food to eat. In other words, if we wanted to, we know this already, go and Google this, the supply of food exceeds the potential demand for food. If we wanted to, we could feed the entire planet twice over so that children in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and I don't want to pick on any particular country, you get the picture, do not starve from famines. The use value of food, amongst other things, is to maintain my biological existence. Does that use value exist? Yes. But the children of Cambodia and Congo and Pakistan do not have the ability to pay the exchange value. Hence, we have the grotesque result of food without people and people without food. That's the contradiction between use value and exchange value.
All right, comrade. The next question is from Aksa. She asks, what does Marx have to say about people who neither produce value nor appropriate it, such as children, elderly, the severely ill, or disabled? Does workers controlling surplus help them too?
What was the name of the person who asked the question?
Aksa.
Aksa. Thank you very much, Aksa. That's a very, very good question. And I'm going to answer it two steps. The first is the practical kind of question that Marx dealt with in this, shall I call it a pamphlet? I'm not sure, an essay, whatever, forget the word. This thing called the critique of the Gotha program, the critique of the Gotha program. And in that critique of the Gotha program, basically Lassalle, this other socialist guy, lovely, amazing person, had written the Gotha program, and Marx presents his feedback, his critical analysis to Lassalle and the Lassallians. And in that particular piece, Marx talks about this particular issue. He says that in a socialist society or in a socialist way of organizing a business, workers are going to get V plus S. But of the product that they get, the total output that they receive, because they're making decisions about it, one part of it is going to have to be set aside to replace the depreciated means of production. Do you agree? One part of it has to replace the pans and the mozzarella and the cheese that we used in the last circuit so that we can make more pizzas next year. Okay. One part of it has to be set aside for children's education, for the education of a new generation of our community. One part of it has to be set aside for people who are, for whatever reason, dependents on, for whatever reason, they're elderly, they're disabled, etc., etc. So a part, Marx says, has to be set aside in every society, by the way. Capitalism has to do the same thing as well. Every society has to set aside a part of the surplus for these social security distributions. So if capitalism is going to make those distributions, as you guys know, in advanced capitalist countries, high school education is free, right? So that is an example of non-capitalist production that is going to exist in every society. And socialists and communists are only going to extend that further with the universal basic income. So absolutely, the answer to your question is Marx addresses that issue. And the difference between, by the way, dependents, children and adults who receive the surplus but don't produce it, and Elon Musk and Warren Buffett and the board of directors of Microsoft, what's the difference between them? What's the difference between the capitalist who receives value without producing it and the dependent who receives value without receiving it? What's the difference? In one case, the direct producer, him or herself, made the distributions to the children and the dependents, while in the other case, he took it from me, right? So here's the point. How we, as the community of direct producers, choose to distribute our surplus is up to us. whether we take the surplus and give it to an animal rights organization, or whether we take the surplus and throw it in the oceans. जिस उर्दू में कहते हैं हम काले चोर को देते हैं बेशक. It's our choice. It's not Elon Musk's choice. It's not Warren Buffett's choice. It's not Satya Nadal's choice. It's not Sundar Pichai's choice. It's the board of directors of the workers who did the work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. If they want to give the value to a charity, they can do it. If they want to turn it into a trip to the Bahamas, they can do that. It's up to them. It's a democracy extended to the workplace. Hence the name of the organization, Democracy at Work.
Wonderful. So we have a second last question. I can't read the name of the person, but it's a very basic question. It says, what's the difference between appropriation and expropriation?
Okay, so when we use the word appropriation, it's a good question, by the way. It's not simple at all. Expropriation means getting rid of the bastard. I'm sorry. Expropriation means getting rid of them. To expropriate, to take their land and to take their assets and all the rest of it. You get the picture already, huh? While appropriation means the actual physical decision making over the surplus. So, for example, once in 3 months, the board of directors of Google, for example, gets together and decides what to do with the surplus that was produced in the last quarter by the workers of Apple. Huh? That's called appropriation, right? And when you and I replace that board of directors with the workers' board of directors, that's going to be called expropriating the expropriators.
Wonderful. So I just wanted to end on this question because I found it amusing. Someone's asking, Doc, are you a Marxist yourself?
What does it look like? Well, um, you see, it depends on what you mean by that term. I just spent like 3 hours talking about definitions, huh? If you mean by the term Marxist that I agree with each and everything that Marx said, almost like a scripture like thing, I am not. But I'm in good company because for people like those, Engels and Marx themselves said that if that is Marxism, I am not a Marxist. But if you mean by that a research area, a discipline that uses the conceptual arsenal of Marx's Capital to creatively make sense of what's happening in the economic and political sense, yes, I am. Right? If that's what you mean by, I use Marx's work to make sense of the world, just as I, for example, use um, Ghulam Ali and Mehdi Hassan's musical theory to make sense of songs, just as I use Darwin's theory to make sense of the diversity of species, or I use Freud to make sense of what's happening inside my brain. Similarly, I use Marx to make sense of what happens inside the workplace and in the economy.
Thank you so much, comrade. So this leads us to the conclusion of this session. First of all, thank you so much to Comrade Shahram. That was a brilliant lecture. And so it's obviously going to be up on YouTube. Please, if you left at any point in between it, feel free to revisit it before the next one. So I'll just remind everyone that this is the new format that we're sticking with for this course. So you get extra benefits for signing up for membership. You're going to get all the readings compiled for us. You're going to get frequent updates and reminders and all. And you can also, if you felt that there's any question you couldn't get the time to ask right now, you could send it and we'll put it to Comrade Shahram and he can respond whenever he has time. And we will get back to you on this. So we hope to see you next Sunday and build our understanding on from here. Thank you so much and bye. Bal Salam.